So I'm normally on this side of the table, so this is going to be interesting for me to try and. I don't expect a Parkinson-like interview here, guys. But I think what I find is most useful is to open up to questions from the crowd often and make it less about just us chatting away and more about you guys. So I guess the format today is I'm going to ask Johnny a few questions. We're going to stop every now and then and just open it up to the crowd. So if you've got questions, bottle them up, and we'll probably through the course of the next hour just throw open some questions to you guys. So before we get started, can I just try and gauge who we're talking to tonight? So how many people here are data analytics geeks who are looking to sort of go deeper in the product? Yeah, so 1, 2, okay, 3, okay, bit. How many people are from the sort of enterprise, sort of corporate level, looking to see how something like Paxata could come into their space? Okay. And how many here just the free beer on a Monday night? Yeah, go. Yeah, great. Before I get started, it's going to be all about Paxata today, but maybe just a brief update. AirTree Ventures, for those you don't know. So, we're a $250 million venture fund. We're the largest in the country right now. We've been doing venture now for 20 years. The firm's all the partners in the fund and AirTree have been founders themselves. That's important for us. But we're not just investors. We're founders who built companies and enjoyed going deep with our founders to help them build the businesses. We invest in in great Australian founders, and some of the stories you might be aware of. There's 90 Seconds, Prosper, Canva, some of over 20 businesses we've funded in the last 2 years. But we also occasionally come across global businesses who have an Australian touch point, and we're very happy to have done that with these guys, Paxata. We're delighted to be part of their Series D round in October. It was a relatively small round by US standards, but by Australians, it's a $33 million round. We wrote our biggest ever check we've ever done into a company, and we're going to be supporting Paxata on rolling out into Australia. So that's us, but this is all about Paxata. So I guess firstly, welcome Johnny, and thanks for coming along. Johnny's on holidays, and his wife's here today, so he's kindly taken time out to chat with us. I guess I'll open up first and just tell us about Paxata and what do you guys do?
So in its simplest form, Paxata helps business people turn raw data into information instantaneously. So what does that mean, right? So that's a lot of kind of words there. Realistically, when you're looking at kind of our personal worlds and our personal lives, we have access to data very, very easily, right? You think of something, you Google it, you look it up, whether it's on Facebook or anything else, you find the information in a matter of seconds. In the business world, it's actually a little bit different, right? So in the business world, we have tons and tons of data, but you can't make any sense of it. Whether it's being, aggregated from, your sales team, your marketing team, your customers, wherever it is, it's really hard to actually aggregate that data and to kind of look at it and analyze it and make reasonable results out of it. So what Paxata does is it really takes the ability to take data from really any source, put it together, and get it ready for prepare for the analysis, right? So to give you an idea, a very easy example, most analytical exercises in any business is a very simple question, right? So they're not very hard analytical exercises. I usually joke and say most of what I do all day is play which number's bigger, right? I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a sales team and I want to know what my close rate is. Let's say my close rate is very simple. You take two numbers and divide it against each other. But one number is housed in my financial systems. One number, my salesperson, is housed in my accounting system, and something else is in my CRM system. It becomes very hard to aggregate that on a large scale, right? So if I want to find one salesperson, that's very easy. I go find a couple numbers, I divide it, that becomes a very simple answer. Now let's say I have 5,000 salespeople with 30 geographies and 50,000 customers altogether. Getting that data all together becomes very, very difficult because you're pulling from different data sources. So 90% of what you're doing in terms of data analysis ends up being just data preparation, right? At the very end, you get an answer, and then let's say that answer is whatever, and you look at it and you trend it, and then you say, when you're looking at the analysis, you're trying to develop a strategy around it. So once you finally get the answer, then from the business side, you're starting to do what really is exciting, right? You're starting to say, okay, well, why is this answer this way? Let's actually figure it out. Let's find a strategy to change it. But you're spending literally 5% of your time doing that and 90% of your time trying to get to the answer. So Paxata essentially makes that 90% much more efficient, right? So it does a lot of the analysis for you, the preparation for you, and gets you to that point where you can actually get to the interesting part, right? At least from the business side of it. So in a nutshell, that's kind of where, what it does. We can get into details a little bit more. But essentially what we're trying to do is make information much more readily accessible to begin to analyze.
And I think one of the things that was interesting when getting to know you guys was firstly that data preparation space evolving from something which was really a nice to have into a category in its own right. And so maybe talk us through how how that market's evolved into data preparation being a necessary evil, as you say. The adage is that you spend 80% of your time in data preparing the data, and the other 20% of your time talking about preparing the data. But that's gone from being a feature to a category, a well-defined category.
That's an interesting question, because really creating a category is a pretty hard thing to do. So creating a category, I've done this in past lives. You can't just come up with a product and a need, right? It has to have several things before it actually becomes a category. So first of all, you have to have several competitors, meaning that it can't just be one person. You have to have a few companies trying to do this, and then you can start to develop a category. Secondly, people have to recognize it as a category, meaning analysts, right? So you have your Forresters, your Gartners, whoever else. They have to start talking about it being a category. The data preparation category in and of itself happened extremely quickly, right? So usually it's one company is the leader, and they spend a lot of money in marketing and building it up, and then other companies follow in. Data preparation was such a need that what began to happen was the folks that were in the data spaces and in the other spaces started to realize that they had an issue with their products, meaning a lot of these analytical players and what have you. Your analytical solutions only work if your data is clean, right? So the easiest or the earliest kind of analogy is, people who say garbage in, garbage out when it comes to data. That was becoming a large problem, and people spent a lot of time, not in sort of software, but in human kind of capital, doing what you call ETL or kind of coding and scripting to get it there. So the data space really, when a few companies actually got to the point where they can actually digitize a lot of this, and that kind of ties into the machine learning and the algorithms and kind of the artificial intelligence that allowed Paxata and a couple other companies as well to digitize the space, and the category developed very quickly, right? So you're very familiar with the traditional world of the database players, meaning just call it the SQLs, the NoSQLs. The new ones are the Cassandras, the Hadoops, what have you, unstructured versus structured. And then there's always been the BI players, several of them to mention. And there's the new BI players as well too, such as the Tableaus and the Clicks that are kind of the newer folks. There was always a piece missing, which was how do you get the data from all these disparate sources into what you want to view it in? So when the category kind of, I don't want to say created itself, but once players started figuring out a way to digitize it, really kind of took off. And it wasn't that, it didn't need the same emphasis as a lot of the other categories that you hear in kind of other industries and other areas as well.
Super interesting. And one of the things you touched on there is, and part of I think the defining moment seemed to be when I think it was Forrester first issued some analysis and called this a category, but that sort of formalized what had been happening for a while. But you touched on the use of machine learning there in how you built the product out, which created, as investors, created a moat around the business and something defensible. It's pretty extraordinary sort of how machine learning has not only affected the use cases for your product, but how you're using it in the product itself. So can you just talk us, maybe you give the guys a sort of talk down on how you sort of use machine learning to actually prepare the data.
Yeah, so machine learning is your biggest buzzword right now, right? So everybody's doing something in machine learning, and if you're not doing something machine learning, you kind of cater what you're doing and call it machine learning, right? So that's kind of what the big name is now. Really, machine learning, what it means is it's learning the steps that a normal human would do, right? So you're trying to replicate what a human would do, but automate it so that you don't actually have to have the human capital to do it. In terms of data preparation, there's very simple steps, right? So typically, especially if you're at one company, you have a data stack, right? You have your databases, you have your CRMs, what have you, and every time you want to do some sort of analysis, you go through the same exact steps to get these together, right? So you pull your data from here, you clean it from here, you remove these rows, you make sure you don't have extra data here, you're starting to map columns and things like that. These steps are common for every sort of piece of data preparation, right? So there's some things that are universal across all companies, and there's some things that are very specific to your company alone. A very simple thing that's universal to all companies is, I guess how many people here kind of know what a VLOOKUP is? Right, so most folks, right? So anybody that's prepared any data has done a VLOOKUP. So what you tend to do is when you're building these algorithms, you take, kind of the idea of, okay, what is a VLOOKUP and what does it mean? let's just find two columns that match in its simplest form. Instead of having the analyst sit there, go find the columns because they may not be named right or the categories might be different, let's have the machine do that for you, right? So let's actually grab this data source, put them together, and it'll tell you, hey, the best way to prepare this data is by joining column number 10 or what have you. And then the next thing you do is you've just eliminated what could have been days if the columns don't match and what the data doesn't match. And that's the very first, kind of most basic step. Then after that, you start to look at things where it gets a little bit more complex and starting to understand the context of the data, right? So at least in America, we have a zip code, which is your 5-digit kind of area code. Postcode.
Yeah.
Sorry. There you go. Any 5-digit code that's part of your address is known as your postcode, if you will. The machine should be able to understand that, right? You shouldn't have to go through and have your data analysts go through and filter for which ones have 4 numbers or 5 numbers. It should understand that, hey, this category kind of looks like a zip code. Let's match on this. And that's a very simple form. But once you start getting to the point where you're actually understanding the context of the data, much like when you talk to Siri or your Amazon Alexa, at first you had to just say the exact words to get the right answer. Then it started to understand what your words mean. So a bird and an eagle might be the same thing. Same thing happens in data preparation, right? You start to understand what is actually in this column and how does it connect to this other piece of data. And hey, instead of you saying, let's put it together this way, let the machine suggest, oh, hey, you know what? This is what we think makes the data look right and makes the data flat for you. And by the way, 4 of your 5 colleagues did the same exact thing. Would you like to do this? So now you're taking this huge space of preparing the data, merging it together very, very quickly, and now you can actually start to put all your resources in the analysis. And the end game here has become much more efficient, right? You're trying to get to, if you're not spending 90% of the time you're on this, you can actually spend that time on things that add value. And that's really how the machine learning kind of ties in at a very basic level.
And I think one of the things that I think you did a very good job there of just distilling it down into simple use cases, but I think it's probably worth reminding everyone here just how big some of these databases you're working with, just to try and give us sort of sense of the size of the rows. It's astounding when we first heard it. Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. So if you're looking at, let's say, back when I was a analyst in my younger days, I used to try and combine a couple of Excel sheets together, right? An Excel sheet right now holds roughly about 1 million rows, about 16,000 columns. That's a okay data set. But when you have things like IoT, Internet of Things, that are, think of a self-driving car, right? Where if you're driving a Tesla, it's recording every single move you make at every single second of the day. And there's, I don't know how many thousand Teslas out there, but imagine all that data. That doesn't fit into an Excel sheet anymore. So where it really starts to break is where you have data that's more than 1 million rows, right? And back in the day, and I don't want to say back in the day, a few years ago, we had relational databases where we started, they came up with the idea of putting everything in a relational table so that you can actually save space, so you can actually run through the data fairly quickly. Otherwise, every query you would do would take, 2-3 days, and then it would be wrong, and then you have another 2-3 days to do it. Now we have, data sets and databases are much, much larger, and the ability to do this on scale, such as doing, 200 million, 300 million, 1 billion rows at once, is something that's very unique. And this is something that your ETL folks or your coders, or even your simple analytics can't do. And that's really where, kind of the qualifier for Paxata is, this is at an enterprise level scale, right? So this is not something where, I personally use it when I would want to put a couple of spreadsheets together. But realistically, let's say if you're a large enterprise or a large retail, the amount of data that they have to push through is enormous. And you have to have a very, very robust system that can ingest and also push out at the same time in memory. So you're not running batch codes overnight, but you're actually doing this live and you're looking at it while you're doing it. So the business analyst is, saying, click this over here, and you get a visual concept of, oh, yes, this might be, 100 rows, but this is what your 100 of your billion rows would look like. And that's where the real challenge comes in, where the data starts to get very, very large. How do you get a system that can actually do that quickly?
I think what makes that even more complex, so you have huge databases that are getting large, getting larger by the month as you have more applications. Obviously, you're trying to make that as efficient and as effective as possible, but then you have this sort of trend towards decentralization of data, or the democratization of data, as we call it at AirTree, where you want to get it out of the hands of the central, the data scientists, and you want to put it in the hands of the BI and the sort of users. So how are you guys supporting, and how does that help your product evolve, and how are you guys supporting that?
No, and so the idea of kind of Paxata has two real kind of qualifiers. One we just talked about, which was kind of the scale. The second part is that we focus on the business consumer, right? So essentially, myself and my team, or the marketing team, or the sales team, we don't focus on IT or kind of the data scientists, if you will. Can we help them? Sure, but that's not where we really focus on. The reason being is, looking at it kind of historically, IT's really kind of owned the data, right? So IT has to figure out the database, they have to figure out what they need. But the business unit understands what they want from the data, right? So they understand that they want to look at, whatever analytical exercise they may be. So you have this large back and forth. So you have the business unit, and felt a lot of pain points of this, I need this from IT, this takes 5 weeks, let's get it back. Okay, well, let's send it back over because the data's not right. Well, let's fix this. That becomes very, very difficult. So the idea of what, Paxata was created so that the business user, without knowing any code, could click and drag what they want. And they don't need to be able to go in and kind of refine the code. They can just say, okay, if I click this over here, that looks kind of like a pivot table. I understand that. Okay, that's what I'm trying to find. And it really eliminates, it frees up IT to do other things, but also from a product perspective, the folks that really need to drive the business are the business users, right? So they have some sort of pain point. And we've gone through some kind of learnings as well. So, when you're looking at IT and folks that have these huge, huge data lakes, are they interested in Paxata? Obviously, because it allows them to give all the data to the business user without having to understand where the data is, what table it's under, what it looks like. For me being, not on the technical side, I know that I want customer information. I don't know what type of data it's stored under or what file system or what have you. I just know that I need that info. So for me, being able to go in there and grab it myself is very, very powerful. Not only that, it allows me to get to things much, much quicker, and also frees up, once again, resources, right? So a lot of the things when you're looking at AI, whether it be Paxata, whether it be data preparation, whether it be self-driving cars, or whether it be HR resources, what you're really trying to do is develop efficiencies, right? So that's really the name of the game overall. And once you're more efficient, you can grow your business. You can spend your resources on other things. You can spend it on sales reps instead of growing a ETL team of 500 people and an analyst team of 30, 40 people. So that's really what you're trying to get to.
So I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to sort of hovering around the sort of market, the product here. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll break it up. If anyone got any questions to jump in here, Michelle's going to have the box soon. But one of the things that I just want to sort of take this thread of you're trying to make an incredibly complex world simple and express that in a way that BI uses. We all used to. We can use it. You're used to SQL or a relational database or Excel. How do you go about designing the user experience, if you like, your BI user experience, and making that seem and look like something that they're used to?
So, the easiest thing that you'll see kind of most companies do in the data space, whether it be data preparation or whether it be an analytical company or advanced analytics, they try and make everything look like Excel, right? Because everybody's familiar with Excel. Excel was a dirty word for a while. I think it's my favorite thing in the world, right? It's my programming language, if you will. When people see rows and columns, it's structured in their head, and they're trained to do that. Now, the data itself might be unstructured. It might be kind of free-flowing. It might be text. It might be CSV files that you can't actually work with if you're not very adept at doing so. But if you can give the business user the feeling that they're working in Excel, and it's not Excel on steroids like you hear all the time, it's just the familiar feel that, yes, I understand this data. I understand, okay, this maps with this. And at the very end, you're trying to get to one simple answer, right? So as long as you can give the business user that feel where they're not simply writing code. Myself, I learned to write code, way back when because I had to. Now, if I see code, I basically kind of put that product to the side because I don't want to deal with it. So taking that out of this, what you have to kind of sell to people, and really making it as easy as possible is the easiest way to kind of get I don't want to say low friction, but less friction.
And how does that product cycle, work? Just talk us through a sort of day of the product cycle. You go into, you go into the Paxata's offices, and there's enormous floor, and there's a lot of heavy-duty engineering work going on there. But it's not what you'd call a consumer-facing business, but you've got this kind of almost consumer-facing element to your business, right? And I'm just trying to think of whether are they on your floor, but that's almost a very different part of. It's what we all see as users, but most of the effort's sort of behind that. So do you get focus groups in? Are you using product roadmaps to try and define the use cases?
So our customers have been very helpful at telling us what we need to do, right? So not just from the customers, but being kind of the main user, meaning myself and the finance team and the analytics team, being the main user of what you're kind of trying to build, there's a lot of feedback there as well, saying, the folks that are building the product are very, very technical, and they take for granted the fact that not everybody's that technical. So simple things like, I need to group it this way, or I need to copy this, or hey, this doesn't work for me. The feedback is pretty constant, especially with, not so much now, but earlier on when the product was being developed and adopted. You get a couple of marquee customers, they give you the feedback, and then you start to build off there. And like with any product, you start to build out features and functionality around the base product, and that's how you get to that point.